Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume. Last week, Treasury released proposed guidance on the clean electricity production and investment credits established by the Inflation Reduction Act. Joining me to discuss this recent guidance is Randa Barsoum, a partner in PwC's Specialized Tax Services practice. Randa, welcome. Great to see you again.
Nice to see you, Sindhu.
So let me start off by getting an overarching statement about the implications of this guidance. What do companies need to know about what they'll have to do?
Right. So the guidance has been long awaited for because these rules go into effect at the end of this year. It did provide a lot of clarity and definitions that we've been waiting for, particularly around what zero greenhouse gas emissions technology might look like. But it also provided a lot of, brings with it a lot of complexity in terms of now how to apply these rules, particularly for technologies that are not going to be considered zero greenhouse gas emission emitters.
And before we dive into the details of the guidance, could you remind viewers of the basics of the clean electricity production and investment credits and the difference between them and the credits that they replace?
Sure. So the existing investment tax credit under Section 48 and the existing production tax credit under Section 45 have really been around for the last 15 or so years. In those two code sections, the technologies that are qualified are prescribed, very specific. And so with these new clean electricity production and investment tax credits that will be going into effect at the end of the year, Treasury and the IRS have decided they want to get out of the business of deciding which technologies are going to be in or out. And the focus now becomes on, they call it a technology neutral provisions, which means that if the technology produces zero greenhouse gas emissions, it could qualify for a production or investment tax credit. The way the rules have been described now is it effectively creates two categories of technologies. One is non-gasification and combustion, and which includes which automatically and categorically have zero greenhouse gas emissions. So things like solar and wind, nuclear fission and fusion, hydrokinetic, geothermal, those types of technologies, they are designated as automatically qualifying as zero greenhouse gas emission. And then you've got the combustion and gasification category, which is going to include things like renewable natural gas, methane, biogases, which are going to require a life cycle analysis in order to qualify and prove that they're zero greenhouse gas emitters.
So, Randa, let's get into these proposed regulations. What is their significance and what areas of clarification do they provide?
Sure. So about 18 months ago, the Treasury came out and had a request for comments. They got over 100 comment letters, which they carefully considered as they wrote and drafted these proposed regs. Within these regs, you're going to see a lot of the same themes that we see under the current Section 48 and Section 45, particularly around the bonus credits like prevailing wage and apprenticeship, domestic content, and energy communities. But there are 5 areas that are new in terms of what was provided for in these proposed regs. The first one is around providing clarity around what's a qualified facility, and providing some more definitions and details around the definitions of retrofitted as well as expanded facilities. The second is providing some guidance on how to determine the life cycle analysis for those gasification and combustion technologies, so the biogases, the renewable natural gas, and methanes. The third is around the interconnection property and how to determine what is qualified as qualified basis for investment tax credit purposes. That one's going to be particularly important for projects that are 5 megawatts or smaller, in order to include that in their qualified basis. The fourth area is they did talk about publishing an annual emissions rate table, which will lay out for various technologies what the anticipated emissions rates would be, the greenhouse gas emissions rates, as well as providing a way for taxpayers and companies to apply for a provisional emissions rate if their technology is not listed on that table that will be published annually. Finally, because these rules will sunset and phase out once the U.S. achieves certain GHG emission goals, there is some rules set out on how they intend to determine what that year is when we've achieved that goal of, the emissions reduction goal that they're looking to achieve. And it's basically the earlier of 2032 or that year. And so that applicable year, how they're looking to determine that is being laid out in the proposed regs.
So it sounds like the lift here really for companies is that they're going to have to study what they have and figure out what needs to be done to meet the criteria.
That's right. And in some cases, it might be a bit more straightforward. In other cases, especially for new technologies, there'll be more work that will need to be done.
So in addition to what guidance is provided, what more is needed? And specifically, what comments is Treasury requesting?
So 4 key areas of where they're looking for additional guidance. The first is, I mentioned about that phase out year, and they have proposed a couple of data sets to utilize for that, to determine that year. They are asking for comments from the public around whether those 2 data sets make sense or whether there should be other alternative data sets utilized to determine that year that we've achieved that greenhouse gas emissions goal. Secondly, there's a whole range of questions regarding the life cycle analysis. There's probably about 13 different categories of questions, again, specific to things like biogas, renewable natural gas, and methane. And so that particular area is going to be pretty complex in terms of they're still really trying to figure out how best to apply those rules around the life cycle analysis. The third area has to do with the application of these energy efficiency ratings for things specifically relating to combined heat and power projects where there is no combustion or gasification. So it's almost like its own third category. So trying to understand how to apply the rules for that type of technology. And then finally, they are very interested to understand the impact of these rules on small entities, because many of these companies that are involved in these new technologies are going to be, new developments, new companies that are up and coming. So understanding what the economic impact on these provisions is on those entities is something that they're also looking to understand.
I'm curious what questions or comments that you've been hearing about this guidance from companies, and also very curious about the types of companies that are affected by this guidance. So, for example, what industries they represent.
Sure. Well, we haven't heard much because I think people are heads down right now trying to digest the 194 pages we got. But, in terms of who this applies to, it really does cut across all the areas of companies that are in that renewable space. Both companies that are, developers that are looking to put in new projects, as well as, companies that are kind of on the cutting edge of new technologies, whether it's nuclear, fission or fusion, hydrogen, hydropower, all those different technologies is really what these rules are intended to promote and help, provide some tax credits to.
All right. Finally, Randa, companies can submit comments. The deadline is August 2nd. What else should companies be doing during this time focused around the guidance, and what actions should they be taking?
Sure. So as you mentioned, comment period is now until August 2nd. So, really encourage companies that are impacted by these rules to think through how they would like these rules to look, because there's an opportunity here to shape them. And these rules are going to be in place for the next, 8 to 10 years. So it's important to be part of that process. And then finally, there is going to be a public hearing on August 12th and 13th. So would encourage companies that are interested to have their point of view and comments heard, to sign up to speak at that hearing.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Randa. And I know we're going to have a lot more follow-up in this area. So I look forward to speaking with you again.
Same here. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Be on the lookout for tax insights that we will be issuing on these proposed regulations. We appreciate you spending this time with us, and we'll see you next time. Take care.